Hello, my name is Jim, and we're going to be talking about this Hart drill driver today on
Kilimanjaro.
This is the Hart HPID01VN half-inch drill driver. I was able to get this super cheap. It was $30 for the drill, a 1.5 amp hour lithium-ion battery, and of course the charger. That was cheaper than anything I was able to find, even at Harbor Freight. So it's a pretty good deal, very inexpensive, but of course it's only a good deal if the thing actually works. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. First off, though, if you're not familiar with Hart, they're a pretty new brand. They seem to be Walmart's house power tool brand. They're actually owned by a Chinese company called Tectonic Industries, which you may not have heard of either. However, they make a bunch of other brands that I'm sure you have heard of, including Oric and Milwaukee power tools. So the same company owns the higher-end Milwaukee tools and the lower-end Hart tools. I'm curious if they're designed by the same people. I did try to find that out, couldn't find anything out. It's hard to find out who's actually designing the tools. Milwaukee does have some engineers in the US. I'm not sure if they're doing the same thing or if they've got some engineers in China or somewhere else that are designing these tools. This was made in Vietnam, not China. I think Vietnam is turning into one of the even lower cost places that tools are getting produced now. And let's take a look and see if it's missing anything that you really need from a drill. It's pretty standard, right? It's got your trigger, it's a variable speed trigger, so you can go on and off. Feels pretty nice. It's got your directional switch here, which feels pretty nice and chunky. It has a little middle offset position to lock it if you want to put it in a bag and are worried it's going to start spinning in the bag. But it feels nice. It has nice detents. It's got a little LED at the bottom here to light up what you're working on. It's not the brightest thing in the world, but if it's dark, it's probably going to be enough that you can see exactly what you're doing. And it does go on very easily, and it stays on a little bit after you've pulled the trigger, which can be very nice and helpful. So like I said, it's got a little 1.5 amp hour battery here that just slides in. Only comes with one battery, which means when that battery dies, you have to wait for it to recharge. A lot of nicer toolkits will have two batteries, but of course that's going to be a lot more expensive. It has an adjustable chuck up here, so you can set it if you're trying to drive a screw and you don't want to overdrive it. You can set it to some random torque value. These numbers don't really mean anything, but you can play around with it and get it so that, if you're driving a countersink screw, it should end up flush by doing that. And it seems reasonably consistent. And of course, you can lock it onto the drill setting here if you just want it to drill no matter what. It also has two speeds, a high and a low. The high speed goes up to 1600 RPMs. The low speed, I think, goes up to 440 RPMs, which is pretty standard for cordless drills. So one thing you'll notice is it's got this white color here, which, of course, if you're going to use this a lot, I think is going to end up getting pretty dirty and looking pretty beat up pretty quickly. It has the typical rubber overmolding that most tools have now. Now that rubber overmolding serves a couple purposes. The first purpose is on the grip area, should help you grip it a little bit better, particularly if your hands are a little slippery from some oil or something. And also on like the back of the tool here, they've made it a little thicker, and that's to help in case you drop it somewhere. If it lands on the back here, that's going to help give it a little bit of protection. Now, some of the nicer tools, though, will also have rubber on the battery, which will help that for drops, and also on the sides here. And I found that that's pretty effective on some of my other tools. I've dropped them from fairly large heights, and they still work just fine. And I think at least some of that is due to that rubber coating that's there. I want to compare this to a prosumer tool. This is the Atomic DeWalt drill. So this is not the highest end one they make, but it's a pretty nice drill. And it comes with their fancy power stack batteries here. So how does this compare to the Hart drill, which costs a quarter, maybe 20% of what this drill is? Well, first off, it's pretty obvious. You can see this drill is a lot smaller, actually puts out a little bit more power, but it's a lot smaller. It doesn't weigh that much less, though. It is a little bit less. But because it's a lot smaller, it's a lot more maneuverable. It feels a lot nicer in your hand. The other kind of things are the fit and finish, not surprisingly. The mold line here looks pretty terrible. You can see some flashing sticking up. This one looks nice and tight. Twisting this feels rock solid. This one feels kind of mushy. Of course, it's so much cheaper. That's kind of the thing that you would expect. Really, the biggest thing here is just the distance. This one is so much shorter. If you want to get into tight spaces, that's going to make a pretty big deal. Now, this one's probably going to last longer. I'll take this apart in a little bit. This one's brushless, so it's going to be a little more efficient, so the battery is going to last longer. It's also probably not going to wear out, and it's probably more durable. The plastic on here, I believe this is an ABS plastic. This is a glass fiber reinforced nylon, so that's going to be a lot stronger as well. However, you may say, well, obviously this is going to be a lot better. It's 5 times more. This one's going to be a piece of junk and it's so big. But let's take a look at a DeWalt from 20 years ago. An interesting thing is these are pretty much identical, except for this had a NiCad battery. This one has a lithium-ion battery. But if you look at them size-wise, feature-wise, even the rubber overmolding, everything is pretty much identical on these two tools. The only difference is this one actually has a light and this one doesn't. So that kind of surprised me that this is basically a 20-year-old tool for $30. It's a fantastic deal. So if you were going to, poo-poo people that might use a tool like this, keep in mind this is what everybody was using 20 years ago, and they made out just fine with it. The one thing that I noticed that this has that this doesn't have, it has a little slot back here for a bit. Now, most of the time now, people are also going to have an impact driver, and they're not going to really use these to drive screws anymore. So that's probably why this is missing that slot for a screw bit here. But it's super handy to have. If you're up on a ladder or something and you forgot your impact driver, you only want to carry one thing up, having a little clip back there that you can just store a bit in for when you need it, very handy. So glad to see that's on here. It's something that I kind of wish they would still put on here, but it's one of those things that professionals don't want to have that. It kind of screams more of a consumer level tool. The only thing that this is really missing that this has is it doesn't have any belt clip or even a spot to hook a lanyard onto. So that can be kind of annoying if you're trying to climb up somewhere or just hang around and have it just handy on your side here. The biggest omission on this tool is the lack of a battery meter. So on some of the tools, they'll have a battery meter on the battery. Some of them will have it on the tool itself. This doesn't have either, so you have no idea how charged this battery is. And I happen to know I just took this off the charger, so it's fully charged. That's probably a good plan if you plan to get this. Just always leave the battery on the charger. Not the greatest for battery health, but that means that your battery will always be charged when you need it. So let's chuck up a bit in here and see how well this works. This chuck is not the greatest in the world. It's all plastic, but it seems to work reasonably well. The only problem I have with it is if you look down the center there, the jaws are fully closed on this chuck, and there's a pretty big gap in the center. So the center of these jaws are ground circular so that it grips onto a drill bit better, but that means that with that large opening there, means that it can't grip a particularly small drill bit. If you want to use a 1/16 drill, you can't use it in this. It won't grip it on that chuck there. So let's chuck this bit in here and drill some holes and see how we do. You can crank it down pretty hard. No problems there. So let's drill a hole. All right, works fine, no problems. Let's go up to a little bigger bit, see how it works with that. We've got a 1-inch spade bit in here, so that's probably the biggest I'd ever be using in a drill like this, so let's give that a shot. This is just a regular 2x4. You can see it has no problem with that. I want to try this other bit. This is called a speed bore bit. It's got a little screw head on the front that actually pulls the drill bit in. They require a lot of torque to drill. Usually I wouldn't use them in a drill like this, but they can be pretty handy if you can't get a lot of force on it, if you're in kind of a weird angle or not. I'm going to try it at the 2. We'll see if it torques out or if I can actually drill at that speed. Yeah, I can't put out enough torque to do it. That's not overly surprising. Let's switch over to the 1 and try it there. So it's able to do it at the 1. That's the same, a regular like DeWalt, the other one I was showing earlier. That one can't do it at the 2 either. It'll torque it out. Here's that same DeWalt. We'll try it with this one here. Battery is fully charged as well. You see, it torques out too, so not any different between the two of them. Let's try driving some screws. We can see how the clutch works on this guy. I'm going to use the included bit here that they gave you. It's a double-sided bit, Phillips 2 on one side and a straight on the other side. So we'll put that in there. I'm just going to drive some regular drywall screws here. So these are 1 5/8 coarse threaded screws. That's no problem. Now it cams out a little bit here. That's pretty typical. That's why a lot of people use impact drivers instead. They don't have that problem as camming out as much. That was on the 1 speed. Let's try it on the 2 speed here, see how it goes. No problem. Now I just had it set on the drill setting here, so it won't torque out automatically. So let's go down to 20 and see if it can control that depth there a little bit. That was actually it camming out, not the drill slipping. Let's go try 12 and see how that works. So that time it was the drill slipping, so that was 12, that was too little. We'll go up to 16 and give that a shot. Yeah, so that works pretty well. So you set it for 16, at least in these settings. You gotta play around with it a little bit, so it's not super useful. I tend to not use that all that much, but if you're doing a lot of drywall or something and you don't want to go too deep, it could be useful for something like that. I'm gonna take a look at the inside of this drill. I'm curious to see if there's any mold markings there, see if there's anything else interesting on the inside. So we'll just zip it apart real quick and take a look. Everything inside looks pretty much like what you would expect. The injection molding actually looks really nice, though. There's a lot of little keys here for the rubber over molding, a lot of fine details that all look really nice. It isn't PA6 nylon like you would expect in a nicer tool. It is polypropylene, so it is a little softer. Not too big a deal. It is glass fiber reinforced 30%, which surprises me. I wasn't expecting that, but that does add a lot to the stiffness of it. It all fits together really nicely. On the electronic side here, it's all pretty much what you would expect. None of this is potted on the higher end tools. This is all going to be potted, which will help with vibration, getting dropped, things like that, water and dust getting in here. That would all help with that. There is a little bit of epoxy around each of these plugs here to keep them intact. So that's something nice to see. On a nicer tool, you would see this whole area though filled with epoxy, but not super surprising at this price point here. You can see it's got a big brush motor up top and the gearbox. The gearbox has a plastic housing. It does look like a nylon housing though. Not surprising. That's pretty much how that older DeWalt one was too. All looks really nice inside. Certainly better than I would normally expect for a tool this cheap. I got this back together now. I will say it was the easiest drill I've ever had to take apart and put back together. Now that means two things. The first is that the molds are really nice. The plastic parts were really well done, that they just snap right back together. They don't have to be like twisted or crimped into place or anything. It also means that they put a lot of effort into optimizing this for manufacturer. Now that does come at a cost of stiffness. There's no like end cap here to keep it in place and keep the bearings aligned. But there's also no parts that span both things. There's no springs that can go flying and that need to be like intricately placed when you go to assemble it. So that's nice to see as well. This is the charger that it comes with. It's got one of these little wall warts, and then this part just clips on the front of the charger. So it's not like a little stand that you can attach to the wall. It's not as nice, but no real big deal. The battery is probably the only problem I have with this and it's kind of a combination of both the lack of efficiency of the drill and the battery. It didn't last very long at all. I've used this for a couple jobs now, and I've had the battery die in the middle of it on one of them after not doing all that much work. So that's probably the biggest thing. I'm more used to using brushless tools these days and generally with bigger batteries. So it works just fine for smaller jobs, or as long as you're aware that the battery may not last the whole thing and it doesn't have a battery gauge on it, you may have to stop in the middle of what you're doing to recharge the battery or get a separate battery, particularly if you're going to have other Hart tools. This battery isn't compatible with any other tool brand as far as I'm aware, so it's got kind of a unique pin connector on the front here, probably specifically to make sure it's not compatible with some other brands, which is always irritating, but it's what everybody does, so not too big a deal. Pretty much the only downside I have with this drill. Conclusion time. I think this drill is actually a pretty good deal. I was very impressed with it. I generally am not very impressed with like tools from Harbor Freight. They generally feel terrible to use and they can be dangerous. They can end up wrecking your workpiece. I don't see any of that happening with this drill here. I think it's going to work just fine. It doesn't have the longest runtime. It's a little bigger. It's a little bulkier. It's probably not going to last so well if it gets dirt in it and things like that. It's probably not going to last 30 years or something like that. But for the price, I think it's really a very good deal. If you're going to be using it every day, there's a lot of benefits to buying a more expensive tool, DeWalt or Milwaukee or something like that. But if you're only using it occasionally, I think this is a really nice tool, and I think it's a really good deal. Thanks for watching. If you've had one of these fall apart or you think it's the best thing ever, leave a comment below and give us a thumbs up.